discussion.
Grazie a lei. Buongiorno a tutti e grazie per l'invito per oggi essere qui con voi. I'm going to talk today about our family business. Our family business was started by my great-grandfather, Giovanni Agnelli, who is called Il Senatore because was made senator for what he has been able to do for Italy. He started his career as a military. He then decided to take care of his own family business, which was fundamentally then agriculture, and got bored about that. And when he was in his early 30s, with other friends of his, decided to start Fiat. He founded Fiat in 1899 and put all his energy in Fiat and built what became a very substantial car company in the 20s. And Lingotto, which is the factory that was built between the two world wars, is a symbol of how innovative Fiat was back then. Fiat developed in making great cars and acquiring other brands in Italy, going through the consolidation of what then was a very fragmented business. And it also developed many other things. It developed engines for planes, for boats, for railroads, and you had a very famous symbol of Fiat in those years, which was terra, cielo, e mare. But it also did fridges and many other products. He decided in the 20s to create a holding company, IFI, Istituto Finanziario Industriale, in order for the ownership of Fiat, but also his other assets, would be kept in only one single entity. And he already had diversified from Fiat back then into different activities, like Cinzano, Rive, and other activities like Sestriere and Juventus, who was acquired by his son Edoardo Agnelli, and actually is the longest sports franchise in the world to have belonged to a family for more than 90 years. His successor in the family was my grandfather, Giovanni Agnelli, with his brother Umberto Agnelli, developed both Fiat and our diversified interest in the decades after in many different companies, both in Italy, like SAI, Toro Assicurazione, Unicem, Rinascente, Alpitour, but also outside, Danone, to more famous like Club Med or Chateau Margaux. So during their leadership, our family interests have actually increased very much, both in Italy and in outside of Italy. I'd like to concentrate on what we did in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away 10 years ago, and then subsequently his brother. And so we ended up in the last 10 years to really go through a generational change. And during these 10 years, we've been very busy in simplifying our overall structure. We had 5 holding companies, and we've reduced them to only one, which is an investment company in the sense that it's less of a caretaker of the assets we had, but it's more engaged also in being more entrepreneurial. We've globalized. 75% of the revenues we had 10 years ago were in Europe. Today it's under 30%, and we've developed very much in North America, where more or less 50% of our revenues are today, and the rest is in the rest of the world, primarily in Asia and Latin America. and we've delevered. The overall debt was 10 years ago of around 1 billion, and now we have 1.5 billion euros of liquidity. And the financial performance of this last decade was that the family interest tripled. And if we look at what the markets did, the MSCI, which is the world index, did more or less 50%. And if we look at the Italian index, it actually lost nearly 40%. So we've been very fortunate in this last decade to fundamentally do two main things. One is simplify the overall structure of our family business, and two, globalize. And three, also deleveraging. And deleveraging we did fundamentally by selling, and so shrinking the number of companies we had and applying those resources fundamentally to help them globalize. Now, the most important achievement of the last decade is what happened to Fiat, and to Fiat, to the car company. If we look at what happened to Fiat, you have to bear in mind that between 2002 and 2004, we changed 5 chief executive officers. And finally, in 2004, Sergio Marchionne was appointed, and the future of Fiat and our future changed very much. And if we think about Fiat in 2004, as you can see by this chart, the car business was generating 27 billion euros of revenue, and that was fundamentally in Europe. And in Europe, it was fundamentally in Italy. We had 74,000 people working for us, and we were losing 1.5 billion euros. If we look at 2012, last year, our revenues in the car business were of 84 billion euros, and mostly were driven in North America. The European component was down to 24%, and the Italian component was under 10%. So the business in those years fundamentally changed, and it fundamentally changed with Chrysler, but also with the Fiat business globalizing itself, and the big success of that is in Brazil. We've increased the number of employees, so we went from total 100,000 to 215,000, and if you look in Europe, we went to 74,000 to 89,000. So doing this, we actually added jobs and employment, and most importantly, today Fiat Chrysler in 2012 was able to turn into a profit of 1.5 billion euros. So this is a fundamental shift that we have been able to go through, and it's not that well known because a lot of the memory is of what Fiat, the car company, used to be. But the car company today, Fiat Chrysler, is a very, very different company. Now, the family is today a family where we are 250 family members, around 100 shareholders, and we have been together for more than 100 years in business. This picture is a picture that we've taken during our last family meeting, which was held not many weeks ago in Maranello, which is a Ferrari headquarters and plants. We have an annual general meeting every year, and we spend 2 days all together, both with a social program and a business program. The family is very united. It has today the control of Exor, which has 10 billion of assets. If we look at overall revenue, the revenue is of 111 billion euros, and we have around 290,000 people who work within our system, so within the companies in which Exor is involved. Our family history is one of the many family histories who are in businesses. And what I'd like to try and do today with you is just from our example like ours, also speak about some general considerations about family businesses at large. And I'd like to start by this chart. This chart shows you that if we look at the last 10 years and you take in aggregate the returns that family-controlled business have had versus the MSCI World, which is the index, the world index, you actually see a substantial overperformance. So what this tells you is that family-controlled businesses perform much better than what the market does. And this is a fact. Now, trying to understand a little more about this fact and what can explain some of this, I've tried to summarize a couple of points. So the first point, especially in this last decade, is that family-controlled businesses tend to be more conservative from a financial structure. So they tend to be adverse to having too much debt and tend to be more conservative in the way they handle their finances. Now, in a decade like the last one, where we've seen so much volatility, so much difficulty in the economy and in the financial markets, that has been a big benefit. On the other hand, if we are in a very positive moment, there's no doubt that if you have a lot of that, there is a benefit to your performance. The problem with that is when times, and unfortunately they always arrive, turn sour, that can fundamentally destroy your company. And so family companies tend to have a much better grip on this issue. The other reason is that family-controlled business tend to be more frugal, in the sense that they are more cautious about how they run themselves, about being much more careful on controlling costs and investments. And there's no doubt that if you're able to control your costs, which is a certainty compared to the revenues, you have a much better base on which to grow your business and on which to mitigate adversity. And finally, diversification. Family-controlled businesses tend to think in a way of how can I mitigate risks? And you mitigate risks by diversification, both in terms of geographies, so being able to have your business grow in different regions of the world, but also in different product lines or different segments of businesses. And there's no doubt that if you have a diversified, not too diversified, but diversified overall business, there are advantages to that. These are a summary of what the three main strengths are of family-controlled businesses, and to some extent can explain the outperformance. But what I also would like to share with you today is some of the conventional wisdom about family businesses, and how those conventional wisdom, if you looked at facts, are actually not true. The first conventional wisdom is that family businesses are small. But now if you look at the big companies in the world, you actually find out that there are big companies which are controlled and influenced by families. If we take, for example, in Italy, a company like Luxottica, which is a very big company, is actually a family-controlled business, and it's world leader. It has a very big market cap. If we look at the United States, Walmart, which is the biggest employer in the world, is actually a family-controlled business. If we go and look in Asia, we look at companies like Samsung, or we look at companies like Tata. They actually are family-controlled businesses. So families are not an impediment to scale. If we think about top jobs, so one of the limitations about family-controlled businesses is that very talented executives, very talented leaders won't be able to work there. Won't be able to work there because ultimately every top position is in the hands of family members. And so they will somehow be capped. But again, if we look at family businesses around the world, so for example, in our industry, and we take the example of Ford, Ford has a very strong chief executive officer in Alan Mulally. And Ford has had an experience of having very strong chief executive officers, despite the family is very present with Bill Ford as its chairman. So you actually find out that the reality is that family-controlled businesses work very well when you have a very strong family presence and a very strong executive presence. And that combination and that partnership is actually very, very positive and has worked out in many examples. The other big thought is that family businesses are fundamentally local businesses because families are very much rooted within a community, and so the strength of that family is within that community. But there again, if we look at companies like News Corporation, it started as a regional Australian newspaper company, and it morphed into one of the biggest media group in the world, going into the UK and then going into the US. If we think about Ambev, the largest beer company, it started with a group of entrepreneurs in Brazil that built it through consolidation into the largest brewery in the world, going around South America, merging with another brewery in Europe, and finally acquiring Anheuser-Busch. And that proved that they were able to build a substantial global business. If you look at ArcelorMittal, which is one of the leaders in the steel, an entrepreneur from India, brother of the smallest brother could not operate in India, went to Indonesia to start a steel business, which was what their family did, and from Indonesia consolidated in it becoming the largest steel company in the world. So these are just some examples about what people say family-controlled businesses can't do or are an impediment to do that actually are not the case. Now, some of the lessons learned that we've had, because family-controlled businesses are great, but they also have flaws, are that fundamentally you need to have an understanding that the family system and the corporate system, the company system, are very different. They're different in terms that their values are different. So you can see in this chart that in a business what you want is you want performance and you need hierarchy. There needs to be a clear line of command. What you want in a family is you want solidarity because you want to be helpful one to each other and everyone's equal. So these value systems will not work together. So what you need to try and do is to make them work. And so if we look at some areas where family companies fail, for example, nepotism versus meritocracy, where you actually end up appointing someone because he's your son, your nephew, but not because he's the best guy. Or conflict of interest. You know, if you start thinking that the company and you are the same thing, and you start putting expenses of your house or your trips on the company, and so looking at the company as a way of funding your lifestyle versus developing it will be a problem. Or if you look at how the governance mechanisms work, you can actually end up doing very bad decisions. And so many family control companies fail, and they fail because all these reasons make them dysfunctional. And so one of the lessons we've learned from other successful family control companies is that you need to be very aware that the family has its values and its objectives, and you need to try and see how you as a family work them out. And your business has its values and objectives, and you need to work it out. And then find a way of communicating between these two worlds, which needs to be a virtuous circle. And the truth is every family and every business is very different. So everybody at the end of the day has to figure out what best works for themselves. I want to close with this quote that my grandfather gave, and I found this quote reading about him as we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of his passing away. And I think this quote has a very strong significance for family control business, and for sure it has a lot of significance for us as a family. And what this tells you is that at the end of the day, you really need to be aware of where you stand. And to some extent, it's true that you have this dynamic of where from strength gives you some power, and you end up having privilege, and from the privilege, you end up thinking about other goals, which can lead to vanity. And if you start getting into that spiral, you actually are beginning an inevitable decline. So the reminder of always trying to be focused on the first part for us is extremely important. Thank you very much.